Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with episode 4 of Stay Frosty with our man, Mr. Rico Ross. So last episode, man, we were talking about how actors who want to get into the business, giving them advice on getting different looks and different pictures, writing into agencies, to say they're in need of representation. But the other idea, man, and I've always believed this, always been a firm believer of this, you have to get out there, no matter if you have the world's greatest agent, you have the world's greatest manager. You got to get out there, man, and self-promote. You have to be willing to promote yourself. I don't know what you think about that, but I'm quite sure you probably agree.
Well, you're right, and I'll say this: when a lot of veteran actors got into the business, we didn't do so much self-promoting. We got an agent, a manager, or both, and they did the promotion, and we did the acting. I remember when I moved back to Hollywood, and everybody was busy self-promoting, and I was used to just send me the script, and I'll show up and do my thing, but it really was a different game out here. The stakes are so much higher. One gig can change your life. The competition is very stiff, and so people are putting in a lot of effort to try and get to that status where they want to get. And I found, you do have to self-promote. And right now, it's very easy to self-promote because all of it's free. You've got social media. You can do a lot. Some people have Twitter and different social media platforms that they only use for professional purposes, and then they'll have others for personal reasons. And why wouldn't you? My son is an amazing musician. He plays a number of like 4 or 5 different instruments, and he went through a period in his life when he was just practicing in his room, getting very good, but not doing the business side of it, letting people know who he is. And I had this conversation with him. I said, listen, you're very good at what you do, but no one's going to come knocking on your bedroom door going, wow, you play the saxophone really well, or you play the keyboards really well. You should come and do this job. No, you have to let them know about how good you are. And so he did. He started. I told him, I said, you got to get cards. So when you do a gig, people come up to you and they like you. You can give them cards so they can contact you. They have all your contact information. You've got to get a Facebook page just dedicated for your music. You've got to do all these things just to let people know that you're out there, because you are a beginner. You don't have somebody doing this work for you, so it's not getting done. Once you reach a certain level, then you will bring in an agent and they'll start doing the work for you. And then you can sit back a little bit and focus back on what you really enjoy. But it's called show business for a reason. And the problem with a lot of artists is they're really good at the show part, crap at the business part. and you have to be good at both of them. And I tell actors, young actors, I said, that energy that you put in writing that script, you have to put that same energy into getting it out there, because it's not going to get out there by itself, and no one's going to come knocking on your door saying, hey, you got a good script. No, because everybody in Hollywood's got a good script. But if you really believe in your work, then you got to let people know. And it's a problem because I've had people who have had projects stolen from them. I have had a couple projects that I feel were taken from me because I shared it out there too early before I got everything legally locked down. And that happens. The problem with that is that it could make you shy for putting things out there. And if you don't put things out there, you're dead in the water anyway. So you have to take that risk. I would say if you're a script writer, then you go and you get your script registered. If you can't afford to get it registered, which is very easy to do now online, then put it, old school version was to put it in the mail and mail it to yourself. And then you get it back, and now you have proof that you were the first one to come up with this script and the concepts in that script and these characters, if you ever need it later on. But yeah, in this age of social media, there's no excuse for you not being really good at self-promoting yourself. And if you're not good at it, then get a friend who is good at it and ask them to help you.
Or a PR publicist, or a PR publicist marketing firm.
The PR publicist, those things are very expensive, and I use them, but I tend to use them when I have a project coming out, and I use them for a period of time when that project's coming out. But they can be quite expensive, and a lot of young actors, a lot of young actors don't have the cash for a publicist. So if you have the ability to use social media that's free for you, why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah, you know, and that's one thing I'm starting to do now, Rico, is actually I'm getting into that space where I'm starting to produce my own projects. I have writers that are really talented writers, and you know, what you just said is key, man. You have to copyright and register that script, make sure you own that title free and clear. The first film that I'm producing is called The King's Bodyguard, about my client Dave Hebler, who was Elvis Presley's personal martial arts instructor and bodyguard. But I've had horror stories in the business, like you just said. You feel like you've had scripts stolen from you. I had a client in the 80s, man. His name was Todd Grodnick. He's a producer partner of mine. He wrote a screenplay called Spy Kids. And I can say this because it's public knowledge. He gave the script to Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg said, I can't help you with it right now. I'm too busy. But I'll get back to you. We never got back to him. And the next thing you know, he turned around and that movie was produced into The Goonies. So it's just stories like that, man. You have to protect yourself. You got to watch your front, your back, and your sides. Real quickly, another one of my clients actually did a film in 1985 called Troll, which was the first film that introduced the characters Harry Potter Sr. and Harry Potter Jr. 10 years before J.K. Rowling wrote a single solitary word on the Harry Potter franchise. 10 years before that was ever a thought with Warner Brothers or J.K. Rowling. So my client left the business for 7 years to take care of his son with cerebral palsy, spent millions of dollars keeping his son alive for his medical bills, came back to the industry, wanted to do a sequel for his movie. Warner Brothers sent him a cease and desist. You can't do this. So went to court. He was able to prove that he owned the copyright and he owned the intellectual property because he copyrighted it through the Library of Congress. He registered it through the Writers Guild. So you could prove that he was the title holder, copyright holder, intellectual property rights holder, free and clear. And we set out to do a sequel, and he passed away from pancreatic cancer. So it's serious, man. People, you have to protect yourself in this business, no matter what area you're in, period.
No, I agree 100%. But I would add to that, when you hear stories all the time about someone being sued and winning, you know, so it does happen. And the way it happens is you bring, as you said, you bring a great idea to somebody, they said, I'm not interested. And then later on, a year later, you see it up on the screen and you know that they've tweaked it a little bit, but that's it. I brought a show to a producer once and I said, this is a great idea I have. And it was for me being a presenter of this show. And she worked with me for a while. And then I got busy working on films and I kind of disappeared. And then I got back and she said she wasn't interested anymore. She had moved on. And then I get a call from her about 6 months later saying, listen, I got this project and it's similar to what you had, but it's got 2 presenters and I'd like to interview you as being have you be considered for one of the presenters. And it ended up being the same concept I had. The only real difference was it had 2 presenters instead of 1. And she was taking that project as if it was her concept. And so it does happen. But you cannot let, there's a saying they have in England, once bitten, forever smitten. And basically that means that if something happens to you, you cannot be afraid to do that same thing again. You just have to be smart about it next time. You learn from it. You get it copywritten. You take the necessary steps to protect yourself as much as you can. And then at that point, you've done your job. You've done all you can do. All the things that you are in control of, you've done. And then you put it out there and see what happens. Because I have spoken to some really creative artists that are afraid to get their work out for that reason. And I'm saying, listen, this is part of the business of being in show business. It's risky. It can be risky sometimes. But if you don't take the risk, man, it's like saying, I'm not going to swing at this ball because I might miss. If you keep swinging, sooner or later, you're going to hit. So you got to be out there swinging, you know?
Totally agree. So yeah, man, getting back to your film career, man, you did a lot of television in the late 80s, early 90s, man. I'm just going to read some of the projects you did here. You did Murder by Moonlight with my client, Brigitte Nielsen.
Right.
CBS Summer Playhouse, you were doing projects for CBS. Also Sleepers, which was the main miniseries. So doing those television shows, man, in the late 80s, early 90s, did you feel that helped your career along? Were you able to get auditions easier with doing television? Because like I know the game of producing and a lot of investors really love actors who have high TV cues. So the more visualized you are, the better in a lot of cases. Like, did you find that to be the case with your career?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is when you're an actor, you want to work. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you want to work. And I have done jobs that I really weren't crazy about the project, but I wanted to work, you know. Uh, there's a famous line from I heard Michael Caine say. He said, he said, sometimes when you enjoy a higher standard of living, you have to do a lower standard of film. And I get it. I get it because there have been times when I have accepted projects where I really did not want to do them, but I just felt like I'm not in the position financially to turn this job down. And the thing about being an actor, and when you're only an actor, is every time there's a wrap in a project that you're working on, you're instantly unemployed. And sometimes I will have 2 or 3 jobs lined up in a row, and I'll know that, okay, that job's over with, but I got these 2 coming in the future. And there'll be times where there's nothing. You don't have a job lined up and you're basically unemployed. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't know when you're going to get the next job. I remember when I bought my first property, my first home, and I went to the bank to get a loan, and they said, well, you're an artist and your checks are irregular. I says, yes, my checks are irregular, but my bills are quite regular. And they said, well, this is what we do with artists. We take your average, we take 3 years of your income, we average it out, and whatever that average is, we're assuming that that's what you're going to make next year. And that's what the bank did. And I remember that experience took a lot of stress away from me, because as an artist, when you don't know your next job, you almost feel like you're never going to get hired again. But I thought to myself, if that's good enough for the bank, that's good enough for me too. I know that I made X amount average over the last 3 years. So I'm pretty sure that if the bank thinks I'm going to make that amount next year, I'm probably going to make around that amount next year. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but that's going to happen. And I remember that taking some of the anxiety of being an artist away from me, because I thought, if it's good enough for bank, it's good enough for me. And so, yeah, it's a hard business. There's no guarantees in it, but sometimes you have to do films that maybe you would not like to do. It wouldn't be your first choice, but as an artist, you know, you also want to work. You're like an athlete that wants to run or wants to play, you know, and so you're doing all this training, but you're sitting on the bench the whole time and you're watching everybody else play, but you want to work. So when a job comes along, you know, you want to play, so you jump in there and you do it. And the other thing is, the more work that you do, work creates work. That's one of the
Mm-hmm.
sayings. Of course, people have heard that. Work creates work. You may do a job. I've done a job where I've done a small job for this one director in particular, and it was a smaller job than a smaller part than I would like to do, but it was a fun part, and I did it. But then the next movie that he called me up for, it was to play the lead in the movie. So, you know, you never know what's going to happen. Work does create work. And this movie that I played the lead in, it was called A Husband for Christmas. And Vivica Fox played my wife in it, and I played the husband. And I played a guy from England that was moving to America. He was very talented, but he didn't have a green card. And her company wanted to hire me, but I needed a green card. And so they came to the conclusion that her and I would get married so that they would solve 2 problems at once. And that's the premise of the show. And we had a great time shooting it. Fortunately, I lived in England for 13 years. The character was English. So 2 days before we started shooting, 24/7, I spoke with an English accent until the very last scene in that movie. I spoke it at home. I spoke it when I went out. I spoke it all the time with an English accent. My kids laughed at me, but they got it, you know? And the reason why I did that is because I had been away from England for a long time, but I also felt like if I'm going to do this character and I'm playing a lead role, there are going to come times when I want to ad lib. And what I didn't want to do is ad lib a line, and all of a sudden I go into an American accent. And this was one of those films where they didn't have a huge budget. So I just thought, if I don't get it right when we're shooting it, they may not call me in to correct it later on. So I want to be able to be ready to ad lib, to just be able to act off of my inspiration and be consistent with this accent. And so, yeah, so I did, you never know. So I work does create work. If an actor, those shows I did, and even though television isn't my first love, theater is my first love. And my love now is film. And the reason why I love film so much more than television and plays is because it's there forever. You know, you do a play, and I've done some amazing plays with amazing casts. And the moment that play closes, it's history.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done some TV shows. And the thing about TV shows for me is they cast you to be you. They cast you to be kind of close to you as possible. And so I find that you don't get an opportunity to create as an artist, a character that you feel like is worthy of your skill set, because there's just not time. You know, a director will tell you in television, and this is good for young actors to know. A director may tell you, listen, you're going to say this line as you're crossing here. You're going to sit down here and say this line here, and then you're going to get up and walk over here and say that line there. That's the way they do very often in soap operas. They have it scripted out before you even walk in the room, and you have to then have the skill set to make all of that look organic. Like these are the moves you would make, and these are the times you would say these words. So it's a different skill set. Whereas in film, I find you actually get an opportunity to play with it, to talk about it, to rehearse it, to workshop it, to do several takes. And by the time they finally get the choice pieces that they're going to use that you will eventually see on the screen, you have a better chance of getting a good performance out of it.
So, you know, talking about being in character and having that dialect through the whole entire film, that's what I call method acting. So right. Like method acting, you know, coming from the stage background you come from in London and having dealt with their technique of acting, has there been a film where you were able to really showcase your ad-libbing and being a method actor? Like in other words, scripts written a certain way, the director wants you to play the role a certain way, but you were actually able to come in to make that role your own, to kind of play it the way you wanted to play it, to actually translate that onto screen the way you wanted to translate that on the screen. Have you ever had any opportunities that were like that in your career? I
must admit that, you know, once you become a veteran actor, there are a lot of opportunities for that. If you're good at improv, if you have good ideas. If you look at Aliens, for example, there's a scene in my very first scene when I get out of hypersleep, and we're in hypersleep. We're lying down in these glass capsules, and James Cameron is setting up the shot, and there aren't as many. There's half as many hyper chambers as you see, because there's a mirror that makes it look like there's twice as many. So he's setting up all of this, and we're all lying down, and we're just lying there, man. And you know, I don't know how long we're going to be there. You just have to be there, because once it's action, then you know your cue. And I remember I was just fed up lying down there, and I get out of hypersleep, and it's my take, and I cross, and I say, I hate this job. That's in the movie. That was never in the script. That was my very first line, but I said it because I was inspired to say it. And when I said it, I remember the next tape I didn't say it. And then James asked me, remember when you came out and you said, I hate this job, keep it in. And that's in the script. The scene around the breakfast table, we're doing the thing with the knife, and they're doing the knife on the hands. You remember that? Those of you might remember that scene where they're picking the knife up. And one of the other actors, and I can't remember whether it was Drake or whether it was one of the other actors, but they said, I had this line, they had this line where we were talking about Arturian Poontang. And one of the other actors says, yeah, Frost, but yours was a man. He ad-libbed that. And so then I ad-libbed, yeah, but when it's Arturian, baby, it don't matter. And that was never in the script. The Arturian subject and was in the script, But those two lines were just interjected, and they were interjected because one actor was inspired to riff the other actor, and I was inspired to give it back to him, you know. But the film that comes into mind most of all, I would say, from a director just saying, I cast you to do your thing, was I did an episode of Highlander, the television series. Now, this is an interesting story because Highlander was cast, was the lead in it. The guy that played the Highlander was named Adrian Paul. Adrian and Paul and I used to model together in Europe. We used to be European models, and we used to model in Paris, Milan with this group, and we would do Paris, Milan, Munich, London, and New York. Either New York, finish it in New York or Vegas, and we would do this every year I did it for like 4 years. So I met Adrian there, and Adrian was a dancer, but he was a great looking guy, had this amazing face, and he was just beautiful, man, and he could move. And this choreographer who cast us, she liked guys who could move, because we we're doing all runway work, but we were doing it with a little choreography. So Adrian and I finished one show, and we finished it in Las Vegas, and he asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I'm going to LA because it's pilot season, and I'm going to LA to audition for some pilots. He goes, man, you know what? I would love to go with you. So I said, man, come on. So we leave. He meets me up in LA, and when we're in LA, I rented one of these. They had a company called Rent-A-Wreck, where you rent this junk of a car, and it was really cheap. So I rented this car, and Adrian and we drove up to Mammoth, and we went skiing. And on the way back, he fell in love with California, and he says, Rico, man, I want to stay here, man. I says, Adrian, do it. I says, I did it in England. If I can do it, you can do it. He says, but I don't have any working papers. I said, I don't have any work. I didn't have any working papers when I was in London. I says, I worked as an Englishman for 4 years until I got my working papers. I says, if you want to do it badly enough, you will figure out a way to do it. Saying that, 2 years later, he was a regular on a TV show in London, in Hollywood. I can't remember the name of the show. And then after that, he ended up getting Highlander. So when I got cast for Highlander, they fly me out. I was living in London. And they fly me out to Paris. And I'm so happy. I'm thinking, oh man, we're going to work together. Adrian and I are going to work together. And he probably hooked me up with this job because he knew that I was a good physical person and whatnot. I get on set, and the first time I meet him, I talk to him. He's as surprised to see me as I was to see him. He had no idea. He said the director had told me that they had gotten this really good actor to play this role, but I didn't know who it was. He didn't say the name. And I thought he had gotten me to hook up to do the role, and he had nothing to do with it. But once I got there, the director, I read the script, and the character I was playing was an immortal. And the immortals usually got their heads cut off by the Highlander. I was the one character that didn't get his head cut off by the Highlander in the history of the series. And my last line was, we'll meet again. But one of the things I said to the director when I read the screen, I said, this guy is 300 years old. And then when I read the script, when I read his dialogue sounds like he's American. And I said, America wasn't even a thing, when he was born. And so I said, I would love to give him a different kind of feel, a kind of mid-Atlantic feel, where you don't know where he comes from, what time period. You can't put him in a time period. And the director told me, he says, Rico, I cast you to create this character. So you do what you think is best. And this guy just gave me free range to create this character. And that is probably the role I am most proud of.
Awesome. So I think a lot of the television work you were doing too, man, led you into the movie Hackers. And that is a cult classic. Everybody knows Hackers, man. So that was also a really young Angelina Jolie in the film. That might have been one of her first roles.
Yes,
man. So talk about that experience. I mean, obviously, I don't know if you knew that she would become this mega star she is today, but talk about the experience on Hackers?
I had no idea Angelique would become who she is now, but I did know that she was beautiful and that she could act. Those two things were evident. And so when we were working and we were talking, she was just a young, good-looking chick that was there doing her thing. You know, I had no idea she would become the star that she's become, and on screen and off screen, and also the philanthropist that she's become. I'm really proud of the woman that she turned out to be. But at that time, she was just a young girl trying to make it happen, you know. And we worked on this movie. We had no idea what was going to happen. We thought it was a great script, and I came in, did my thing. I was only on it for a short time, and I was on to the next job. And to this day, I still haven't seen Hackers, but I do want to see it because I want to check it out, man. It's lasted so long, and people do ask me about it, so I want to check it out.
So that's actually another interesting question. So there's probably a lot of projects that you've acted in that you haven't seen. So are you one of those actors, man, that goes back to actually review your work to look to see what you've done? Or are you one of those actors that do not like watching yourself on screen? You just keep doing what you do and you don't really go back to watch yourself?
Tim, I don't know if I'm as cognizant of that or not. I do know that there's one movie I did. You remember I told you the story about Lance Hendricks. He told me, you know, you really should do these smaller movies because there are a lot of energy and all this blah, blah, blah. There was a small movie I did. It's called Night Walk. And I remember I wasn't even going to meet for this film because it was, when I work with small projects like that, I don't want to audition for them. I'm offering you my service, so don't make me audition. And this guy was kind of, he really asked me to audition, and I was like, I was going to pass on it. But I ended up having another meeting that was within a block from where his place was, where he wanted me to read. So I said, you know what? I'm so close. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go in here and read. And I went in there, and I also wanted to show him why you don't ask a veteran to read. I went in there, and I said I'm going to blow their minds with my reading of this character. So I go in there, and I do my thing, and it was me and this other actor who passed away a few years ago named Tiny, big, huge black dude named Tiny.
Tiny Lister Jr. Yep.
Yeah. That's me, him, and some other people, and the guy that was playing the lead. And we're doing our thing. And I knew that I had done what I came there to do. But it was a small movie, so he offered me the part. I did the part. We shot a couple scenes here in Los Angeles. They took those scenes, myself and a couple of the other actors that were recognizable. They took those scenes to the Cannes Film Festival in France. And on the strength of those scenes and the subject matter of the film, because the film was a film, the press said this was the first film where the Middle East and America and the West actually discussed why they don't like each other. Because before this film, they said the West would say the Middle East, they're terrorists, they're full of this, blah, blah, blah. And the Middle East would say America, you know, death to America, and would never go into the reasons why they felt this way. Where I played a Muslim terrorist, and I was in prison. And and when you're in prison, there's nowhere to go. So you can have these conversations because you ain't got much else to do. So then we would have these conversations, and we would justify our point of view. And one of my rules for me that I tend to gravitate towards whenever I'm playing a villain is that the villain in the film should feel just as justified by their action as the hero does by his actions. So if I'm doing something that comes across as quote unquote evil or bad, I'm not doing it just to be bad or evil. I'm doing it because I feel I'm justified in these actions, and I'm just as justified as the hero is in his actions. And let's see who wins. And so with this role, that's the attitude I went in there. So when I'm acting on screen, I'm really, you know, I mean what I say, even though I may not mean it as Rico may not mean it. But when I'm playing that character, I mean what I say, and you can see it in my eyes that I mean exactly what I'm saying, no matter how horrific it might be. So that's one of the films that the director, I met with them probably. Uh, we ended up going to we ended up getting the funds after the showing in Cannes to finish the film, and they ended up getting enough funds on the film to hire Mickey Rourke and some other actors, and we ended up shooting on location in Morocco and Casablanca in Morocco. We shoot this film, and I got to tell you, shooting it in Morocco was a trip in itself. But we shoot this film, and this was the same little film that ended up that I was going to pass on, but I didn't pass on, and it ended up taking me to Morocco, shooting for a month there, and then staying over there in Africa and traveling while I was there, all because I showed up. So that's another thing for actors. Let them know that if they're listening to this podcast, half of becoming successful is showing up. And that was a prime example of that. But yeah, that was a film that the director, I met with them at a dinner like about a year ago, and he said, "I got a little present for you," and he gave me the script. He gave me a CD of the movie, and I have yet to see it, but I want to go through it because I do think that there was a performance there that I could possibly learn something from myself, and I'd like to see my performance when it's not in front of an audience and they're influencing me. I'd just like to look at that. So that is one of the projects that I would like to see. But now that you've mentioned Hackers, I want to see Hackers as well. But what happened with a lot of films is I'll do the film, and keep in mind for those of you who are listening, you do the film wraps, and it doesn't come out for a year. So by the time it comes out, you've moved on, and your head is so much into something else. And if you can make it to the premiere, if there's a premiere, then you will, and you'll see it there. If there's not a premiere, you may not see it. If it comes on television, you may miss it. You may be working on another project out of town, so you may, and then before you know it, you've forgotten about it, and your focus is on the next project. So that happens very often with films that I've done. But there are some films that I would like to go back, and that was one of them, Night Walk. I want to go back and see that performance, and now just out of interest, I want to go back and I want to see Hackers.
Right on. Well, I know you were in Wishmaster, and that's another cult favorite amongst horror movie fans, man. Wishmaster. So, I don't know if you have any experience or thoughts about that film, Wishmaster. You probably didn't know what it would become when you were doing it, but it's a cult film.
Wishmaster was one of those films, man. Tim, it was a film where it had the Candyman, it had Freddy Krueger, me. And it had one other horror actor who played the lead. I can't remember his name in the film, and it had all three of them in the same movie, which was kind of like you never see three horror lead actors in the same movie, and it had all three of them in the same movie. I thought that was a cool thing for the director and the casting director to be able to accomplish. But the essence of the film is in the title. Be careful what you wish for, the kind of tagline. And you make a wish, and you may get it, but it may not be the wish it may not be what you expected, but it's the wish that you made. And so there were a number of murders that were happening, and people were trying to figure it out. And so eventually I become the detective who gets on the case, and I have to figure out these murders, and I become a victim myself. But it was the project where I read the script, and I remember thinking when I read the script, this is very clever. It wasn't a big film, but I thought this is a very clever concept that they've got right here, and it lends itself to go anywhere your imagination can go. And it did, and the film came out, and people loved it. People loved it so much so that they made I think at least one or maybe even two sequels after that. But I was only in the first one because I get killed off in the most horrific way imaginable.
We've got about 2 minutes left, my man. You want to close it out? You have any thoughts you want to share with the audience? Any words of inspiration?
I I would say this for young actors. I would say this is the best time in the history of Hollywood to be in this film, in this business, because there are so many different platforms where you can get your work done. I also think that, this is a time when you don't have to have a lot of money to get something done also. And so you can create content, and content, once you've got content, you've got the power. Lastly, if you happen to be a person of color, this is the best time in the history of Hollywood to be a person of color, because there are decades that would go by where you couldn't even get in the door. Now you can get in the door. And once you get in the door, what are you going to do? So I say, if you're a young filmmaker, if you're an old filmmaker that's coming to the game, if you're a veteran, don't give up. This is a good time for you. There are platforms that need content all over the place. Go for it, man. Go for what you want to do. Go for your passion. Because if you, as I said earlier, if you swing often enough, sooner or later you're gonna hit.
I'm gonna say this, man. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of episode number 4 of Stay Frosty with your host Rico Ross. And focus, strategize, energize, and most of all, Rico, what should they do? Stay
frosty,
stay
baby.
What?
Stay
right
frosty.
On, my brother.
All right,
there it
brother.
is.
All right.
Peace out.
All right, peace.